I'm Josh Jackson, and this is OCF Crosspoint. Here's a comment from today's guest, who's a senior at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. We can talk all we want about how there's a calling to be a Christian in the military, about how that's a mission field, but I need someone to show me how to do it specifically. In this episode, you'll hear her story and how God spoke to her during a literal mountaintop experience. That's coming up on episode 44.
You're listening to the OCF Crosspoint podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to sharing stories of military life at the intersection of faith, family, and profession.
What comes to mind when you hear that someone had a mountaintop experience? Maybe you think about Moses, who hiked back down the mountainside, literally glowing because he had been in the presence of God. Or Peter, James, and John, the inner circle of Jesus, who saw Jesus in his divine, true nature as he was transfigured right in front of them. You might recall that was an event that impacted Peter so deeply that he wanted to camp out and build a few memorials for Jesus, Elijah, and Moses. The point is this: we regard mountaintop experiences as those moments when God moves in such a mighty and unexpected way that, at least figuratively, we come back glowing like Moses, or wanting to build a memorial like Peter. And while a mountaintop experience can take place anywhere, for some people, such an event actually takes place on a mountaintop. Take, for example, my guest today, First Class Cadet Brigit Jogan, a senior at the United States Coast Guard Academy. During her time at Rocky Mountain High this past summer, Brigit hiked the summit of Mount Antero in Colorado's Collegiate Peaks. And it was during that physical climb to the mountaintop that she experienced the Spirit of God moving in a mighty way. Today, Brigit is going to talk about that experience as she shares her story. Brigit, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I want to hear some more about your story. Tell me about where you're from and why the Coast Guard.
Yeah, of course. So I'm from Grosse Pointe Park, Michigan, which is right outside of Detroit, Michigan. And I first became interested in military academies during middle school when a swim coach told me I should look into them. Once I took that more seriously later in high school, the Coast Guard really caught my eye because of the nature of the service. Because the Coast Guard at its heart is a humanitarian service with a peacetime mission, and that's awesome. And so I also knew that the Coast Guard, and specifically the Academy, was a very small community, so I'd be entering a really tight-knit family, and that was something that I wanted to be involved with.
Okay, so you're a senior at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, and as you look back over your time, the past 4 years, what's Academy life been like for you? What are some of the things that you've learned about yourself?
Oh my gosh, it's been such a whirlwind over the past 3 years, just from start to finish. I cannot believe how much has been packed into that time, and I also can't fathom what God has in store for these last 2 semesters before I graduate. So even like today during Spanish class, during first period, I was thinking about everything that's gone on, and just, it's been awesome. God has used so many great experiences to shape me and to grow me. Personally, I know I've grown and changed since I swore in 3 years ago. So right now, I'm a whole lot more confident than I was, both in who I am like as a person and my identity and my worth, and I'm more likely to speak up if something is unjust or if someone's being treated unfairly. But without a doubt, the most significant change for me has been just the deepening in my relationship with Christ over the past years. And I'm super glad that I've not been the one at the helm for this journey, because I could not have written as awesome of a story as God's been writing. In terms of challenges, I started off my cadet career thinking I just wouldn't make it here and doubted I would ever feel at home or feel happy. Since then, I've had plenty of friends who are just in hard situations where people feel powerless to help. And that's been hard, but it's also been really cool to see how God has just met us at every turn and the joy that's come out of those situations.
Well, would you mind sharing a little bit about your spiritual journey? When did you accept Jesus and begin following him?
Yeah, so in high school, I was your classic, future military academy student. I was captain of the swim team. I got straight A's. I was a total nerd, president of the particle physics club, your total rule-following teenager. And I never really had to confront any of my own insufficiency, any of my own failure, because I really didn't encounter that very much. I was pretty good at the things I did. And so when I showed up to the Coast Guard Academy, everyone told me it'd be the same way. I assumed it'd be the same way. And it was not the same way. I completely just crashed and burned and failed my way through our 7-week indoctrination period. We call it Swab Summer. And at the end of it, I felt almost just unrecognizable from the person I was in high school. And I felt pretty worthless because I had just failed to perform. I'd let people down in so many ways. And I was pretty sure that, no one would want to be my friend, that there was no point in being at the academy. I just felt directionless. And so growing up, I definitely had a church background. And I knew all the church language. I knew who Christ was. I knew what the gospel was. But it wasn't until my freshman year here at the Coast Guard Academy that I really confronted any of that truth personally or at a personal level. I was at a low point my freshman year, especially at the start, but that opened up such a great window to learning about a God that delights in covering our weakness and our brokenness, that his love for me had nothing to do with my performance, had nothing to do with how people felt about me. And to actually just form that relationship, to realize that I needed God desperately, not just in a way of like, God, help me on this test, but day to day, meal to meal, hour to hour. And so God did restore my performance as a cadet. Like, I definitely got my act together, but in the process, he showed me that none of that success is going to be fulfilling, that none of that is worth anything unless I'm doing it for him, for his glory. And so today, I just praise and thank God for that rough introduction to the academy and to the military, because from that, just so much light has shone through into my life, and I've been able to use that to help other people also.
Well, let's dig into that just a little bit more. What's it like being a cadet and then also being a Christian? Are there any difficulties that you've experienced when it comes to, say, integrating your faith into your life in the Coast Guard?
So here at the academy, one of the biggest challenges about being a Christian is almost purely logistic. It's an issue of time. So I'm an electrical engineer. I carry upwards of 20 credits a semester. I play a sport like every cadet is required to. And I have daily military responsibilities that take up time. And God deserves the best of us, the best of our time, the best of what we have to give, not just what's left over at the end of the day when we're exhausted. And so being a Christian as a cadet, choosing to follow God as a cadet, means that sometimes I have to choose to prioritize my relationship with God over everything else. And so sometimes homework will go unfinished, and sometimes, work is submitted late, and there's definitely lots of lost hours of sleep in there. But doing this for God and with God is the only thing that makes it possible and the only thing that makes it worth it. And I know that the time pressure is only going to increase when I graduate. So I want to learn how to prioritize God now when I'm still a cadet, so I can be ready to do that when I graduate. And just in general in the military, there's always significant pressure to conform. Everyone wears the same uniform. Everyone should act professional. No one should, stand out unless it's for some great achievement. But as Christians, we're called to be salt and light, to stand out and to be different. And sometimes those sacrifices are going to be easy and joyful. And sometimes they might mean that someone looks at you funny. And sometimes they might be illogical. And sometimes they might be really hard. So here at the academy, I have an awesome Christian community. I have brothers and sisters who I literally live with, who are there to support me. But sometimes you still make choices that are just unpopular. And so right now I'm learning how to define what I know is what is true and what is right, and how to seek the approval of God, not just to seek the approval of the people around me.
Yeah, and I know from Commander Carl Crabtree, who is a retired Navy and also the OCF field staff rep to the Coast Guard, that you're pretty involved with the ministry team there. So Brigit, I want to hear more about your involvement in OCF, and let's start with how you first heard about OCF and why you decided to give it a try and then stay involved.
So the story of how I first got involved with OCF is a little bit funny, at least to me, maybe to no one else. We have a Wednesday night church service during Swab Summer called Vespers, and there's some time for fellowship to relax for a bit afterwards, and I was sobbing hysterically in the corner, as one does sometimes. Just, really overwhelmed and upset. And Carl Crabtree came up and he was like, "What's wrong?" And because again, I was making a lot of sense, I assured him that nothing was wrong and I was fine. And so, reasonably bemused, he asked me what he could do to make me smile. And I asked him to play a Christian song by Ren Collective from his phone. And then he said, "Okay, now I want you to consider, join OCF when the school year starts." And I was like, "I don't know what any of these acronyms mean. I'll do anything you say." And so, but when the school year started, a friend reminded me, and I did follow through on that. And so people invited me to come out to the Friday night fellowship meeting. And at first I just kept coming back because I liked the worship music. It was familiar to me and everyone was really welcoming. And so keep in mind at this point in my time as a cadet, I was convinced I would have no friends and that I didn't deserve to have friends. So people welcoming me, that was way out there. After, as time went on, as I gained confidence, as I learned more about my identity in Christ, I kept coming back because I just admired the upper class cadets who lived for Christ, who, they just had such strong walks with God. And I saw how they lived, and I wanted to have what they have, and I wanted to live how they lived. And so I just can't overstate how important that community of believers was to me then, or how much it has been since then.
Yeah, talk more about what it is you do with the ministry team, or just exactly how involved you are with the OCF group there at the Coast Guard Academy.
Yeah, so I'm our cadet OCF president for the coming year, and there is always something going on with OCF on base. So just for like a weekly schedule, on Mondays, I co-lead a women's Bible study. On Tuesdays, our leadership team meets to plan events. Wednesdays are for prayer. Fridays, we have our big fellowship gathering, and Sundays are for evening worship. And in between, I get to meet with other cadets for smaller Bible studies, or to read books together, or just to, get to share this kind of awesome phase of life we're in together. Lots of logistics work, planning events, planning retreats, project management, stuff like that. And then I've gotten to lead mission trips during the past few years during spring break. We spend time on the weekends at Shepherd's Fold, which is the OCF retreat house off base. And so really OCF has been not only the most impactful, but easily my favorite activity I've been involved with while at this academy.
Okay, and one of your recent opportunities with the OCF group was that you attended Rocky Mountain High, which is a leadership development program that takes place at OCF's Spring Canyon Retreat and Conference Center in Colorado. Do you mind if I read an excerpt from a letter that you sent to the home office talking about your experience at RMH?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, there's a section that has a good comparison of how God shapes the earth versus how he shapes us. And I quote, "Heaven is his throne. The earth is his footstool. But where will his resting place be? He exercises his divine, universal right to shape his footstool as he pleases. And often those methods are incredibly powerful and violent. But his resting place, his home? It's my body, my heart. I'm a temple for the Spirit, a home for God. Here is his resting place. How does he shape his home? So much more gently than an avalanche, so much more gently than a rock slide. He shapes me with his word, with his other children, with the whisper of his Spirit, with worship, with lessons learned. God dedicated this week to shape me." End quote. Brigit, it sounds like that week definitely made an impression upon you. Tell me more about your RMH experience. What was that like?
RMH was just absolutely awesome. Hands down. I would go back tomorrow if I could go back without a second thought. Part of what made it so great was, I can't tell you the last time in my life I've put my phone away for a week. I've put a computer away for a week. And I can't tell you the next time when I'm going to have that opportunity to just step out from all of the demands, everything that demands my time day to day, hour to hour, and to get to spend time in God's creation with God. So we spent the whole week just outside in the mountains, hiking and joking around with each other and spending time in his word, and also just spending time alone with God. And it was beautiful out there. Colorado was great. And it was on my heart the whole time that nature has no choice but to declare the glory of God. Just in its very essence, nature is beautiful and it reflects God's hand, his care, and his beauty in it. But God has given mankind free will to choose to glorify him. And we get that choice. As I walked away from Rocky Mountain High, it just was so heavy on me to make that choice, to choose to glorify him where I'm at. And right now, that's in the military. And so that's not just going to be someplace that I fall in, someplace to slug through, someplace, it's a job and nothing else. But that's where God has planted me, and that's where I'm going to get to glorify him. And so Rocky Mountain High was a chance where I got to just step back and reflect on the truth of that, to reflect on God's heart for me, and to not just be carving out, half an hour at the end of the day to frantically pray and then go to bed, but to really just spend time with him.
Yeah, and there's another part of your letter that you go into that idea of the military being a mission field, and it's also your calling and that sort of thing. If you would, talk more about that, and particularly that aspect of, or that idea that the military is a mission field and that it's your calling.
As a fourth class, as a freshman at the academy, one of my mentors told me that my CAP card will get me access to spaces that I would never otherwise have access to, and just the implications of that in terms of missions, in terms of spreading the gospel. And it's true. In the military, I will have access to people and spaces and just situations that, just someone off the street's not going to be able to have. And that's a blessing. That's a privilege. That's not something I want to discount. And that also comes with the responsibility to be a conduit of the gospel in it. The Coast Guard, the classic phrase is, the Coast Guard saves lives. We're here to save lives, but we're also, saving souls is the mission of a Christian.
Yeah, so if we continue with what you're saying, and again, that this is a mission field and a calling, what do you need to be successful in that endeavor? And let me contextualize that just a bit first by saying that one of the things that we talk about here at OCF as a ministry to the military is how we want to equip leaders for Christ-like service. So I guess my question for you, Brigit, is what would it look like for you to be equipped for Christ-like service, or what sorts of things would best equip you to live out your calling as someone who's very early in her military career?
So when I first showed up to the academy, the thing that most impacted my desire to know Christ was seeing the upper class and how they lived out their walks with Christ. So my military career hasn't really started yet. It'll start next May. But I need the same guidance. I need the same examples, the same role models of, we can talk all we want about how there's a calling to be a Christian in the military, about how that's a mission field, but I need someone to show me how to do it specifically. And we have a great network of mentors here at the academy, but when I get out to the fleet, I mean, I would just love if there were going to be Christian officers who were going to teach me what it means to both professionally and personally live out my calling as a Christian in the military, in the Coast Guard.
So if listeners were going to take away only one thing from our conversation today, or maybe only one thing from your story, what would you hope that it would be?
The concept that there's always a deeper joy. I love going to school here at the Coast Guard Academy. I love the military academy stuff. It's so much fun to live in a building with all of my best friends, especially because so many of them are just such strong Christians and amazing people. It's so much fun getting to be involved with ministry here, to get to see lives changed in little bits. But as happy as that is, and as grateful as I am for those experiences, there is always going to be a deeper joy in Christ, a deeper joy in following God's will. And that supersedes any position that anyone is in. It doesn't matter if I'm in the military, if I'm a cadet, if I'm out of the military, anything, that the deepest joy is always going to be in Christ. So to Carl and Christy Crabtree, I want to thank both of you so much for the work you've done in my life and in the lives of cadets here. And I know you'll have to listen to this eventually. But thank you for your just selfless offering of your home. Thank you for the mentorship you'd offered us. Thank you for the time you've just poured into our lives to help us as people, to help us grow closer to Christ. And it's going to have eternal impacts. And my life, my time as a cadet would just not be the same without either of you. So thank you guys so much for the work you've done.
And Brigit, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today, for coming on and just sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a cool opportunity.
Okay, well, that's going to do it for another episode of OCF Crosspoint. And as always, if you have an idea for a guest, topic, or story you'd like for us to consider on a future episode of the show, send an email to me at podcast@ocfusa.org. Thanks for taking time out of your day to spend it with us. And we hope that you'll join us for the next OCF Crosspoint.
The views expressed by the hosts and guests of Crosspoint do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Officers Christian Fellowship of the United States of America, its governing council, staff, or of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, or any branch of the U.S. Armed Forces. For more information about Officers Christian Fellowship, go to ocfusa.org.